Hi, this is the chapter on ornamentation from Bach's Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach's Versuch über die wahre Art, das Klavier zu spielen. And this is the first part of that, and the first part is on ornamentation in general. So here we go. Zweites Hauptstück von den Manieren. Erste Abteilung von den Manieren überhaupt. Es hat wohl niemand an der Notwendigkeit der Manieren gezweifelt. Man kann es daher merken, weil man sie überall in reichlicher Menge antrifft. Indessen sind sie allerdings unentbehrlich, wenn man ihren Nutzen betrachtet. Sie hängen die Noten zusammen, sie beleben sie, sie geben ihnen, wenn es nötig ist, einen besonderen Nachdruck und Gewicht. Sie machen sie gefällig und erwecken folglich eine besondere Aufmerksamkeit. Sie helfen ihren Inhalt erklären. Es mag dieser traurig oder fröhlich oder sonst beschaffen sein, wie will, so tragen sie allezeit das ihrige dazu bei. Sie geben einen ansehnlichen Teil der Gelegenheit und Materie zum wahren Vortrage. Einer mäßigen Komposition kann durch sie aufgeholfen werden. Dahingegen der beste Gesang ohne sie leer und einfältig und der klarste Inhalt davon allezeit undeutlich erscheinen muss. So viel Nutzen die Manieren also stiften können, so groß ist auch der Schaden, wenn man teils schlechte Manieren wählet, teils die guten auf eine ungeschickte Art außer ihrem bestimmten Orte und außer der gehörigen Anzahl anbringet. Deswegen haben diejenigen allezeit sicherer gehandelt, welche ihren Stücken die ihnen zukommenden Manieren deutlich beigefügt haben, als wenn sie ihre Sachen der Diskretion ungeschickter Ausüber hätten überlassen sollen. Auch hierinnen muss man den Franzosen Gerechtigkeit widerfahren lassen, dass sie in der Bezeichnung ihrer Stücke besonders sorgfältig sind. Die größten Meister unseres Instruments in Deutschland haben dasselbe, wiewohl nicht mit solchem Überfluss getan. Und wer weiß, ob sie nicht durch diese vernünftige Wahl und Anzahl der Manieren Gelegenheit gegeben haben, dass die Franzosen anjetzo nicht mehr, wie vordem, fast jede Note mit einem solchen Zierart beschweren und dadurch die nötige Deutlichkeit und edle Einfalt des Gesanges verstecken. Wir sehen hieraus, dass man lernen müsse, die guten Manieren von den schlechten zu unterscheiden, die guten recht vorzutragen und sie an ihrem bestimmten Orte in gehöriger Anzahl anzubringen. Die Manieren lassen sich sehr wohl in zwei Klassen abteilen. Zu der ersten rechne ich diejenigen, welche man, teils durch gewisse angenommene Kennzeichen, teils durch wenige kleine Nötchen anzudeuten pflegt. Zu der anderen können die übrigen gehören, welche keine Zeichen haben und aus vielen kurzen Noten bestehen. Da die letztere Art von Manieren von den Geschmäcken in der Musik besonders abhängt und folglich der Veränderung gar zu sehr unterworfen ist, da man sie bei den Klaviersachen mehrenteils angedeutet antrifft, und da man sie allenfalls bei der hinlänglichen Anzahl der übrigen missen kann, so werde ich nur etwas Weniges am Ende bei Gelegenheit der Formaten davon anführen, im Übrigen aber bloß mit denen aus der ersten Klasse zu tun haben, indem sie mehrenteils schon von langen Zeiten her gleichsam zum Wesen des Klavierspielens gehört haben und ohne Zweifel allezeit Mode bleiben werden. Ich werde diesen bekannten Manieren einige neue beifügen. Ich werde sie erklären und ihnen so viel möglich ihren Sitz bestimmen. Ich werde, der Bequemlichkeit wegen, ihre Fingersetzung, insoweit sie merkwürdig ist, sowohl als die Art, sie vorzutragen, gleich dabei mit anführen. Ich werde durch Exempel das, was man nicht allezeit mit aller Gewissheit sagen kann, erläutern. Ich werde von einigen falschen oder wenigstens undeutlichen Zeichen, damit man sie von den rechten unterscheiden lerne, ingleichen von verwerflichen Manieren das Nötige erwähnen. Ich werde zuletzt meine Leser auf die Probestücke verweisen und hoffe durch alles dieses, das hier und da eingewurzelte falsche Vorurteil von der Notwendigkeit der überhäuften bunten Noten bei dem Klavierspielen ziemlich aus dem Wege zu räumen. So I read through all the paragraphs in a row so that if you're looking back on this video at the words, you can, you get them right at the beginning of the video and you don't have to listen to me talk in between. And I just want to read something I took from the internet. And this is an extract from, it says, ACD's Biographische Nachrichten von Joseph Haydn, Vienna 1810. So that's like biographical news from Joseph Haydn. And it says, Haydn ventured into a bookshop and asked for a good textbook on his theory. The bookseller named the writings of Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach as the best and most recent. Haydn wanted to look and see for himself. He began to read, he understood, found what he was looking for, paid for the book, and took it away thoroughly pleased. That Haydn sought to make Bach's principles his own, that he studied them untiringly, is apparent even in his youthful works from that period. From his 19th year, Haydn wrote quartets which gave him a reputation among lovers of music as a profound genius. So quickly had he learnt. As time went on, he acquired Bach's later writings. In his opinion, Bach's writings form the best, most thorough, and most useful textbook ever published. As soon as Haydn's musical output became available in print, Bach noted with pleasure that he could count Haydn among his pupils. He later paid Haydn a flattering compliment, that Haydn alone had understood Bach's writings completely and had known how to make use of them. So I read that out to go with what I wanted to say regarding what I just read out and how to consider it. And if you think of that first paragraph, Bach sat down and had to introduce and describe ornaments. And he starts off saying, everybody knows how necessary ornaments are, and you can see that by how in that you find them everywhere. And then he went further. He said, but they are actually indispensable when you consider their usefulness. And then he compiled that list. And so what Bach was doing is he's he's using his insight. He used his insight, first of all, to decide on what goes into that list of why ornaments are indispensable. He decided what goes on that list. He decided on their order. And what they do is they sum up Bach's insight, because and it's each one of those elements, it's like they're the tip of the iceberg, that protrudes out of the water. But and some of them might be tiny, but for each of those little tips that you see above the water level, they're part of a huge iceberg underneath the water. And that's what all those are. So it could be easy to kind of skip over them and say, yeah, nice, and know that. But you will find later that this, when a man with insight talks, when somebody, not a man, a man or a woman with insight talks, everything they say is of consequence. Everything means something. And so that description that he has, or the list that he provides of why ornaments are indispensable, that is a key to figuring out when you have the right answer, when you are using the ornaments properly, and you figured out exactly how they're meant to exist. You will get that from that list. So that list, when you get the information that comes later on, and you go back to these words, and you can recognize the iceberg that's concealed beneath that tip, just standing out, those words will have a completely different effect on you. And that's, in that extract, Haydn, Bach said to Haydn, what was it? That Haydn alone understood Bach's writings and knew how to make use of them. That is in reference to, there'll be so many people who've read those words, and they won't have meant anything to them. They won't know how to make use of them. They won't ever realize the insight with which they are said, with which they were chosen. And that Haydn stood out as somebody who took the time, who discovered the significance of those words. And I just read that out because just to show that there is significance to be discovered in those words, that when those words will be words to go back and read again, and they're like the guideline as to how to choose correct ornaments. And for each one of them is an iceberg of knowledge and insight. And it's and so basically this is Bach's entire knowledge of ornamentation summed up in a paragraph. And so if you are playing Ornaments and they fulfill none of those requirements that are on the list that Bach provided, well then that is a good indication that you're playing them wrong, or and you're playing them wrong because you're understanding them wrong, and that you have no insight into the role or the function of ornaments. And so what Bach is going to provide, just like he provided to Haydn, and Haydn knew how to read the book. Bach doesn't spoon feed. Of all the people, Haydn was the one to discover what lies in the book. He is a proof of what lies in the book. There was another extract I just took from as well from the internet, and this was an account of a meeting between Mozart and Bach by Johann Friedrich Rochlitz, and it's from For Freunde der Tonkunst, 1824. So for friends of basically music, or the art of sound. And there's a bit at the end that's dubious, I don't believe, but the other bit I kind of, it seems that it's possible that Mozart actually said it. I'll just read it. When Mozart visited Leipzig a few years before his death, he had passed through Hamburg shortly before, and there he had taken pains to visit Bach, by then already advanced in years. He heard Bach improvise a few times on a Silbermann instrument, that's a forte piano. During a musical soiree at the home of Dulles, Mozart was asked by his host for his opinion of Bach's playing, as the conversation was entirely concerned with such matters. The great man replied with his characteristically Viennese candour and directness. Mozart wasn't Viennese, he came from Salzburg, and so he moved to Vienna, and so he wasn't Viennese, and he was as Viennese as anybody is who moves to a capital later, in when they're sort of a young man. So he wasn't Viennese. So replied with his characteristically Viennese candour and directness. He is the father, we are the children. Those of us who know anything at all learned it from him. Anyone who does not admit this is a... And then in brackets it says, this last word seems to be connected in some way that I did not understand. So, and this is the dubious bit that I'm not, I'm suspect about. What he did, Mozart continued, would be considered old-fashioned now, but the way he did it was unsurpassable. He preferred to hear me play on the organ, although I have long since been out of practice. He didn't mind that, and so he embraced me over and over again until I almost cried out. So, yeah, that doubtful bit. What when Mozart's saying that what he did would be considered old-fashioned. Well, I would say Mozart listening to Bach would be the same as, like Guns N' Roses listening to Jimi Hendrix. And if you think of the music of Jimi Hendrix compared to Guns N' Roses, like in the Appetite for Destruction days, Jimi Hendrix, the product that Jimi Hendrix provides will for anybody, the unenlightened or anybody looking at it on a superficial level, the Guns Appetite for Destruction will be more slick, more produced, more of a product pared down to its more marketable. Whereas Jimi Hendrix, his product is more raw, more experimental, more personal. It's not in clear, it's not so like, it doesn't have such a glossy finish to it. There's sort of warts and all in the product, and there's no slick music videos to go with Jimi Hendrix, and also you could, in that sense, it would be an old fashioned, but there is no way you Slash from Guns N' Roses, or if you take Metallica, Kirk Hammett, there's no way they would call Jimi Hendrix old fashioned. And I use that as examples because I think the difference between Bach and Mozart will be the same. I think that the music that Carl Philipp composed and played, it was a lot more experimental than the classical. The music, the next generation of that Mozart represented, it was a lot more mainstream. They had figured out the product, whereas in Bach's time it was exactly like Jimi Hendrix, where it was emerging a new kind of direction or taste in music. So I see Bach's music as being more experimental, and and I see it as well that Chopin with his mazurkas and stuff, that's rather harking back to Bach. It's like another reaction after, like, the classical music period is like the rock, the 80s, and then the romantic is like grunge or Nirvana as the kind of reaction to that, and they're going back to a more raw product. So I see the old-fashioned in that sense, and I can't believe that Mozart. Yeah, he could have said it, talking about how generally people will perceive it, of course, but there's no way he will have seen it as old-fashioned. And then when it goes on that Mozart talked about how he preferred him to play with the organ, and that he embraced me over and over again until I almost cried out. I mean, Mozart would only say that if he's an idiot. And it's almost slanderous to attribute, in my opinion, that to Mozart, that he goes on about how Bach adores him, in the same breath as he says, "He is the father, we are the children. Those of us who know anything at all learnt it from him. Anyone who does not admit this is a bleep." Bach or Mozart is saying, if I've learnt anything at all in music, I've learnt it from him. I've learnt it from Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach. And everybody has. Anybody worth anything has learnt it. And if they don't admit it, well, that's a reflection on them. Mozart is basically saying he too is a pupil of Bach, just as Haydn is, and just as Beethoven will be. And you could imagine Beethoven, when Beethoven took lessons from Haydn, that may perhaps Haydn mentioned that to Beethoven about, you know what, Bach says, nobody's understood his writing better than I've understood it. And that Beethoven will say, hold my beer. But that's the insight that's there to be gotten. And what I'm going to try, and I say that to say, one has to one can't expect to be spoon-fed. The words themselves, as innocent as they seem, they are to be considered and not glossed over. And you'll find if you listen to this and go back and listen to those words again or read them, those are what will be your guiding light. These words are the description of what it's like outside of the cage. And to anybody in the cage, they won't mean anything. Because people in the cage, they have, when you're in the cage, you have a cage mentality. Because you don't realize you're in a cage. And so you're not, why did, of all the people, why did so many people read Bach's book? And yet it was only those few, like the likes of Haydn and Mozart, Beethoven. It was only them who were able to unearth the treasures that are that lie in those words that Bach provided. Why is that? And that is because when you have the cage mentality, people don't realize they're in the cage. And what you're looking for, when you're in the cage, you're looking for the things that, one, either hide the fact that you're in a cage, two, that decorate the cage, or three, give you something to do in the cage. And so when you're only looking for those things, anything that describes freedom or describes what's outside the cage, it means nothing to you, because there's nothing you can do with it. And so an example like what would appeal to with a cage mentality, if Bach had said, what I want you to do is wake up every day at 7 o'clock, and I want you to tie a string to your nose and then attach the other end of the string to your middle finger. And then I want you to sit at the piano, and the string should be tight enough, not too tight that you can't move the finger, but tight enough that you can feel it tug on your nose every time you press a key. And then I want you to turn on your metronome at a marking of 100. I want you to press the key of C, and then, like sing out gobble, 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 and flap your arms after you do so. And do that for 10 minutes before you start. Obviously that's absurd. But that's the thing, when you're in the cage, that's something to do in the cage, and people with the cage mentality, they'll respond to that and they'll think this is great. And the more of that Bach provides, the more people in the cage will respond to it and go, this is the best thing ever. And all of a sudden, they have something to do. They can get up and they're reassured by somebody they trust. They completely believe it. And they'll get up every morning, they have something to do. And it's great, it makes cage life better. That's what people respond to. So if Bach would have had anything like that, there'd be more people other than Haydn, Mozart and Beethoven having discovered the value or the treasure that's to be found in those words. Whereas, you can imagine it nowadays, if Bach did that, you'd have people putting up videos with strings tied to their nose, and then influencers would start wearing the string tied to their nose outside and say, why take it off? And then it's a fashion statement, and everybody says how brave they are and how great it is, and everybody's going around with strings on their nose. That's That's the cage mentality. That's why the truth is, that's why so few people, Bach, you know, Bach will have written those words and he'll be thinking, will there be people out there who truly, or who can figure out what it is I'm saying, what it is I'm sharing? And he's waiting. Then he sees Haydn was one of them. And he says, you know, you alone understood my writings completely. That's, to me, that sounds like that was a long time Bach was waiting till he found somebody who understood his writings completely. And what I am offering here, what I want to do is help you gain that same insight that Haydn gained, or that Mozart gained, or Beethoven gained, and to know, to be able to look at Haydn's pieces, Mozart's, Beethoven's, with that same insight. And I would say, not wanting to sound big-headed, but just based on evidence, that if Bach and Mozart and Beethoven were around today, and if they didn't have their own access to those writings, that they'd be subscribed to this channel to get that. They'd want it. So that's there for you. And those words are to be, each word, this is a man with insight talking. He had to decide. He thought of everything he knows, understands about ornamentation, and he came up with that list. And that's what that list means. They're not just filler words to get onto the good stuff. There is nothing more profound, more a sign of his genius than those words to begin with. There's nothing, you know, the good stuff is presented to you right there in paragraph 1. And if you don't see that now, like if you don't see that they're only the tip of the iceberg and they represent something huge, that's not, you don't need to feel bad about that, because obviously you can't know that till you become aware of the iceberg. And so what you'll be getting then in the course of these chapters and all, you will have the opportunity to gain the insight that Bach possesses. The insight that means that a pupil of Bach can achieve what Haydn, Mozart and Beethoven achieved. People wouldn't like to consider Mozart as being an expert, I get the impression. I get the impression that people like to think of Mozart as this kind of a talented idiot, you know, who was given a gift by God, a wondrous, wonderful gift, and everything, it all came so easy to him, and it was like God was speaking through him. But that in reality, he was a dope. It would be devastating for experts to find out if they were, you know, they say a lot of, you know, it's often said, oh, I'd love to have heard Bach or Mozart play. No, they wouldn't. Because if they were to hear Mozart play, if they were to experience the level of, that his level of expertise, that he wasn't an idiot at all. He was somebody who knew more about music than anybody else knew. And that Mozart would come with a clenched fist. He wouldn't be some, you know, comic book caricature. That would be devastating. It would be like Bach or Mozart would be holding up a mirror to those experts, and those experts would see the reflection and they'd see the bars of the cage in front of their faces. and they'd realize they are in the cage, and they'll probably feel when they're so overwhelmed that they could never escape, that they're going to spend the rest of their days in that cage, and will never have known what it's like outside of the cage. And the decoration, the distraction of the cage. Bach will say, after he tells you to tie the string on the end of your nose, he'll say at the end of it, and after 20 years of doing that, you will be no better at playing the piano than as you were when you began doing it. And that's, that's waiting. All those gimmicks, all that rotation, all the counting out loud, metronome work, hands separately, hands together. At the end of your life, at the end of a life of doing that, you'll be no better at playing the piano. You will have no greater insight into music afterwards than you had beforehand. So I am going to I'm going to give you access to that insight. And I want to say as well, you can see that with Haydn. If you think, yeah, but that was back then. Think of it in terms of time or in history. What did Haydn have in order to become a pupil of Bach? Haydn had Bach's book, and he had the desire or the ambition or the willingness or the eagerness to study it until he had unlocked its secrets. So he did not have more than I have now, or than what you have or had. He might have had a bit more, like in terms of figuring out what Bach is actually saying and how the words are used back then as compared to nowadays. He might have had a bit of an advantage, but generally he had no... It's possible to become a pupil of Bach with that book, alone with that book, and with your willingness to study it, observe it, and pay attention to it. And with the chapter on fingering, I know, like I am positive that there is publicly, what's available publicly. There is no more detailed examination or regard for that chapter on fingering than what I have provided. You won't find people reading between the lines, connecting the what's being said. You're not going to find it. And I will do the same with this. Not entirely the same, because the other thing, the AC fingering, made that possible. And so you could be like Haydn, like Mozart, like Beethoven, a pupil of Bach. When you listen to these videos, when you can use... I have the gall to say that my translation of those words is the best translation you are going to find. Because I as well have the gall to say that I have unlocked many of the secrets. That's where my gall ends. I'll say many of the secrets contained in that book, whereas other translators haven't unlocked any of them. They're just translating the words. They have no awareness of the treasure that Haydn discovered, that Mozart discovered, that Bach or Beethoven discovered. And that makes my translation better than any other translation you're going to find. So that means you can be, if not with me, then, I mean, of course you can get the book yourself, but if you don't have access, if you don't understand German, I am the link. I am unlocking the secrets of that book for you. I'm prepared to do that. That is something I'm happy to provide. You could think of that paragraph 3 where, you know, Bach says about the ornaments, how people being acting more care when they include in their pieces what ornaments are meant to be played and where, than to leave it up to the discretion of unskilled practitioners, for the want of a better word. You could maybe think of Beethoven and how Beethoven didn't want anybody adding their own ornamentation to his pieces. And you could imagine Beethoven having read that book, taking that to heart and, you know, thinking, yeah, that's me. That'll be me. I'm not going to leave that up to unskilled people to decide. I'm going to tell them when and where to put the ornaments. And I would say that Beethoven didn't adopt that stance just because he wanted to, but he adopted that stance because he gained the insight that Bach is going to provide here in this chapter. And what happens is, you know then that the music that you have written could not be ornamented in any other way other than how it is. That every single that you have, that Beethoven will have known, he'll have provided every necessary ornament, and that any other ornament would be superfluous or would detract. Because what Bach is talking about here in those paragraphs that I read out is knowing nature. And so with Beethoven, you could think Beethoven decided, yeah, I'm going to do that too, but he didn't decide. It became inevitable. It was like, you know, muss es sein, es muss sein. It was inevitable that they had to be like that. And that's as well the insight that stands to be gained from what you're going to see discussed in these videos. And that, you know, you could think that Beethoven, I mean, there's evidence that Beethoven considered himself an aristocrat and above, you know, common folk. And I would say that's a sort of a side effect from Bach's book, that when you start gaining the insight that Bach possessed, and it was an incredibly, incredibly generous act that he did to provide those willing to, you know, free themselves, providing that chance to be actually able to do it, that you as well are going to feel, having that insight, and then encountering all the people who lack the insight, you are as well going to feel like an aristocrat. It's a natural kind of a result of this book. And I would say that element there, that as well points to just how much this book played a role in Beethoven being who he is, just as it played a role in Haydn, or Beethoven becoming Beethoven and Haydn becoming Haydn. Yeah. And there was another thing in that paragraph 7. Everything he says there about what he's going to do, Bach speaks the truth. So he actually does everything he says in that paragraph he is going to do. He does it all. And one of the greatest, there's that word in the paragraph, sits. And this is a difficult word to translate. And it means seat. And I had lots of words, like I wrote in place, and then I'd have I'd say in brackets nature or existence or essence, or it's basically what Bach is doing. This puts him, the fact that he includes this explaining the sits of the ornament. This puts him on a level above any other expert I've ever encountered. This is a level of insight that is just mind-blowing. It's almost too much to think that any person would ever share it. And that sits is one of the most amazing. His explanation of the sits of the ornament is one of the greatest elements in store for you. And it's that insight where, it frees you from the cage. Another way the cage works is that you will recognize somebody from the cage when they provide you rules without any explanation as to why. And cage mentality, an educated cage person knows all the rules. They can tell you all the rules. So if you're getting a lesson from somebody in a cage, they're going to tell you the rule. Do this, don't do that. But they'll have no explanation as to why. And those people who want to put you in the cage, the way to do that is to create rules that turn something that's natural into something that's unnatural. And so if you do something, it's what's natural about doing that is that is what the result is going to be. So let's say you pour water on your hand and your hand gets wet. This is a stupid example, but just to illustrate. Well, it's natural that your hand gets wet after you pour water on it. If somebody was able to convince you that your hand being wet after you pour water on it is unnatural, well, that will mean, and that your hand staying dry after you pour water on it is natural. That means you're going to spend all your life trying to pour water on your hand without it getting wet. And because it gets wet, it means you're a failure. You are inadequate. There's something wrong with you. And that's the cage then. And so you're always going to be pouring water on your hand, and it's going to get wet. But when you understand that when you pour water on your hand and the hand gets wet naturally, you're going to stop pouring water on your hand. And if you want a dry hand, you're going to do something different to keep your hand dry. And that's how the cage works. They turn something that's natural, they make it unnatural. And until you can do that and have an unnatural result, you are a failure. And that's what happens with, you'll find out, this sits, why it's so valuable is it's going to free you from the cage, because what it works with ornaments as well. if you have an unnatural ornament, and believe me, the way ornaments are misinterpreted, there's a pile of them. It's going to be natural that you'll never be able to play them as good. And if you don't understand the sits of the ornament, you will always be in the cage, and they will always be able to have you feel inadequate, inferior, untalented, all these things, because they have convinced you that something unnatural is natural. And if it's not natural for you, there's something wrong with you. So this is the key to freedom. And I would say at the end as well, that paragraph 7, that Bach, when he talks about clearing out of the way, the idea that, about piling on the notes, and he calls them bunten, note and colourful. But I think he means bunten here in a sort of an ironic or a sarcastic way, that it's not a compliment. He's not actually calling them, colourful notes. It's like colourful in the sense that, in an ironic or a sarcastic sense. And I think he's describing the Lilliput, the land of Lilliput there. And I can see that it hasn't changed, that it's the same now as it was then. And there's could be cosmetic differences that could fool a person. You think that, well, back then, what he means is everybody shoved ornaments everywhere, like he talked about the French shoving the ornaments everywhere, and we don't do that now. Now what we do, we only play the ornaments that the composer has written in. Otherwise we're not putting any ornaments in, so it doesn't apply to us. But that's only on a superficial level. When you get down to it, the predominant attitude today in lessons in universities everywhere regarding ornaments is the exact same. It's about piling on the notes. Trills are about, playing notes, fitting as many fast notes in that trill as possible. If there's an ornament, let's say in a Mozart piece, and you're told you can have 3 notes, 4 notes, 5 notes in it, well, everybody will want the one with the 5 notes in it. The champions that the people, name their champions, they'll be the ones that have 5 notes in that ornament. It's no different. It's the lack of insight means it's all about piling in as many notes as possible in the ornament, and all that insight that Bach provides in his first paragraph about the function of ornaments, those ornaments that your champions play, that that students aspire to, that professors kind of dangle like a carrot. Oh, you play the 5 notes, then you're worth something. That's exactly that same mentality that Bach would like to clear out of the way. And it's a mentality that you will, with the insight at the end, when we're through with ornamentation, you will, if you do not want to leave the cage, you're not going to figure it out. You're anyway not going to watch this, because there won't be anything. There's no tying strings onto your nose, or regimes or routines to do that you can repeat in your cage to keep you distracted on a daily basis. There's none of that. There's only insight, figuring it out, discovering, and then exploring the free world once you've done that. And it can go, and it's not a question of time. You can see as well there, Haydn was 19 when he was discovering it's not a question of time. You could start to explore the free world tomorrow with with the stuff that I've provided in those videos, about virtuosity, about finger position. You just have to sit down and try it and forget about everything you know. And you could find yourself on that same day beginning to explore life outside of the cage. And you will as well, you will see how utterly absurd it's like seeing how absurd the behaviors of a person in a cage are compared to somebody not in a cage. You will see how absurd those ideas, those Lilliput ideas actually are. And so Bach will have succeeded in his ambition to clear out all those, that false prejudice that exists today the exact same as it existed then in Bach's day, because it's born out of a lack of insight. That'll be gone, and it'll feel like it's gone because it's a victory, not because it's a loss. And you'll laugh at how you were trying to do what's completely unnatural and feeling like a failure because you didn't do it. And the thing is as well, why does somebody, the elected champions, why can they play the trill or whatever, the ornament, with 5 notes instead of 3 and get it right when it's unnatural? And why they can do that is you can, if something is artificial, it's only going to work in an artificial context. So it means everything that they play around that ornament is artificial, is unnatural, and then it works. But what you're looking at and I don't know how controversial that might seem or arrogant, but what you're looking at, with anybody with insight will know what I'm talking about. What you're not looking at music. What they're doing is not music. What they're doing is typewriting. It's playing notes, and that's how it becomes possible. But that's the routine is for the being busy in the cage. What they're doing is they're decorating their cage. That leads to the decoration of the cage. But it's cage life, and if you want joy, if you want to taste freedom and live the rest of your days outside of the cage, you do not want either of that, because neither of those people are actually happy or content with what they have. Yeah, so it's still, Bach's goal is still left to be achieved. And I guess I'm maybe, doing my bit to help him achieve that goal. And hopefully, here it is. Here's your access to that same insight that brought Haydn where he is now, and Mozart and Beethoven. And of course Mozart, and I'm not saying that Mozart wouldn't have known anything without Bach. He could have figured out all that stuff without Bach. But Mozart himself, if there's any validity to that account, Mozart as well, he said, those of us who know anything at all learnt it from him. He does not include himself. He does not exclude himself from that. But if you think of Bach Bach's family and the generations they go back. I mean, it's probably quite unique that you have generation after generation pursuing wisdom and insight into music. And Bach, if you think of music as a language, Bach grew up bilingual. The insight that he shared, the insight with which he compiled that list, this is somebody who grew up around his father, listening, knowing what his father knew about ornamentation, listening to his father's use of ornamentation. And his father is drawing from generations of the family business being music. This is unique. This would, because you might think, well, if everybody needed Bach, how come Bach became Bach without anybody? But Bach didn't become Bach without anybody. Bach became Bach through generations of endeavor and exploration and the deepening of insight into music, and the culmination being Bach's father, Johann Sebastian Bach, and then Bach's children who possessed all that insight. Yeah, Bach is bilingual. Bach grew up speaking the language of music from childhood on, plus the language of German. And so what person is more qualified to translate the language of music into our language, into the spoken word, than somebody who's bilingual, who's grown up speaking fluently both languages. So, yeah, I'll continue with that. There's stuff to look forward to. Bye.